Good. So I will. I'll say a good afternoon and welcome to our walking through Matthew. So this will be our last session of the summer before we take a little bit of a break, and we'll be back by then into chapter 14. Which, seeing as there are 28 chapters in Matthew, we're not quite halfway through. Just one more chapter down, and we'll be halfway through. But this is a reasonably good place to take a break. So thanks everyone who's here. I will go over to here, and there's my welcome. So I again, with the passage we're covering, there are lots of potential titles offered themselves, but I've gone for hidden and shared treasures of the kingdom, because there's an element of things that are being hidden, but there's also something about sharing. So just to kind of give some context as we run through the end of Matthew, which is this end of chapter 13 of Matthew. Matthew's collected together a number of illustrative parables of the kingdom. He's explained how parables are to be understood. So as we run through the end, we get a number of very quick, short sort of similes, and then there's a little bit of kind of interaction that kind of that has a nice kind of archaeological kind of take to it, which we'll get to at the end of the passage this afternoon. So we're starting with, as we say, this is our third session on the parables. So we're now into the short ones. So the kingdom of heaven is like a wealth deposit. We put the word treasure. The reason I wanted to kind of give it as a wealth deposit is it really is something that has been kind of laid down. And so the idea when we hear the word treasure, and of course it's in the field, we think of buried treasure, and I think that's not unreasonable. But equally, which is why I've gone for the slightly clumsier translation, there's a kind of an aspect of there's which is there is often wealth in the ground. You get that idea right away from Genesis, where there's gold in the land and so on. So it's not necessarily that someone has kind of buried something to come back to. It could just be that there's an understanding that within this field, which we can understand from the value of a field, but there's something more in it. There's a wealth deposit that's concealed in a field. That little Greek word there for concealed is often translated hidden or buried, but it just means kind of covered over. And the reason I wanted to mention that word is because it appears a second time. So he conceals it and then he conceals it. So it's there, but actually he keeps it secret. So if we were kind of giving a slightly more elegant English phrase, we might say, there was wealth or a treasure buried in the field. A man found it and kept it secret, but by using a slightly different phrase for the two, we miss the fact they're both the same. And I actually thought there's something about the concealed nature, which I think is quite key as we kind of run through this little series of parables. There's something about the kingdom that Jesus is focusing on that has a certain hiddenness to it. And so the hiddenness comes into the fact that it's hidden to start with, and the guy keeps it a secret to some degree. There's something protective about it. Now, if we try to be too literally kind of analogous in terms of this means this, this means this, this means this, it gets kind of things like that make it a little bit complicated. But the parables aren't necessarily analogies, or allegories. They are stories that make you think and kind of take on ideas and ponder and meditate and so on. And therefore, I think that the idea of the hiddenness that's in these coming verses is seems to be a key one to me. So he finds something that was hidden. He keeps it secret, but for the joy of it, he goes and sells all he has and buys that field. Now, you've got to kind of put this into the context. We've been running through parables of the kingdom. There's something that grows, there's something in me that's going to change. But now we're moving on to what's it going to mean to follow, and that really is the heart of these three little. I just said they're not analogies, but these three little parables that Jesus is going to tell in the next run. They're all about recognizing the value of something that's a little bit hidden, that's something that has to be dug out, that's something that has to be worked on. And so that's an important principle, and the fact that although they're short, the 1, 2, 3, there's a kind of a sense of get hold of this. I was having a conversation just this morning with someone who sometimes rings up with pastoral things or questions, and wanted to know why certain things seem to be you have to sometimes look a little bit deeper, because on the surface, the sad thing was they were kind of referring to how very often in church they've had kind of rather simplistic approaches pushed on them in a quite unhelpful ways, and they're saying, well, it probably doesn't mean quite the way you think it does, or it's been presented to you, this is the reason. And he was not in a critical way, but just asking, why do you have to work a bit at it? But actually, I've often thought about that, and I think that it makes it worthwhile. If you're really going to, it's the way, there's something about the value that God has put into people, that it's only really what they struggle to understand that really shapes them in a way that's genuinely fruitful. And so I think it's similar, even with our faith, that there are some things that are easy. We can just kind of, we can rest on those. But if that was all it was, we would be quite shallow people. It's often in the things we have to kind of play with a bit, get them out, struggle with them, turn them over. There's something about the hiddenness that I need to value. It's not that everybody's going to know that I'm suddenly Mr. Wealthy because I've got this hidden treasure in my field. It's something, though, that as I understand it, I have to plan for it in my own space, my own time. I have to invest my own things into it. So he sells all he has and he buys the field. And then Jesus goes on and gives another alternative. Again, the kingdom of heaven's like, it should be heavens, actually. I should have put that in plural each time. Kingdom of heaven should have an S on the end because it's Matthew's gospel, which shows the Aramaic sources of Matthew's thinking, because heavens is a plural word in Aramaic, which comes through in the Greek of Matthew. So again, the kingdom of heavens is like a man, this time a merchant seeking quality pearls. We often translate it as a pearl of great price, but I think again, there's a slight difference in emphasis. If you understand, because the word can mean a valuable, extremely valuable pearl, there's something about the perspective that the merchant brings to it, that they see the value beyond perhaps the person that's selling it. So it's not that I'm a super wealthy person who can buy something super expensive. It is someone who has an eye for understanding value that others don't see, comes and sees a pearl which he recognizes has real value. There is a subjective element to it, but the subjective element is something that we all kind of bring in our own ways. We all develop a certain expertise. I noticed we have Jem with us today, so I'm planning some audio recordings to go in the run up to Christmas. So I've been talking to Jem a little bit on how to capture certain things. So Jem teaches audio recording. There are things that when Jem listens to a recording, he will hear that others don't hear, because he's bringing a sense of the values and the giftings that God has given him. He's looking in with those things, or listening in, I should say. He's listening in with those things to kind of a recording that we can all listen to, and we can all say, oh, that's probably okay, but he will hear it in a different way. And I quite like to see that in this kind of opportunity. There's something about the perspective that sees there's value here. And that particularly comes through in this parable about the pearl. That the kingdom of heavens is like someone who because of their training, because of their instinct, their merchant nature, their mercantile nature that's gone off, seen something that's been dug out of a river and is being sold in the raw, but they can see something of its value and what could be done with it. And so having it found this one extremely valuable pearl, they went and sold everything they had and bought it. And so that's kind of shifting from, okay, you found it by accident, the first story, so you worked to get it. This time you came and you saw something in it that drew you. It kind of it got hold of the sense of who you are, what your identity and your gifts and your skills are. That drew you, but in both cases, it inspires them to do what they can do to get hold of it. And then again, so we'll just finish these three because they're quite quick. The kingdom of heaven, should see heavens, is like a dragnet. Now this one gets a little bit more sophisticated. So if we just park it for a second, we'll come back to the first two, which is that sense of there being something in the message that Jesus is bringing, that with the right appreciation, we will see things that others don't see. And people worry about when you say things like this, because they say, are you talking about a gospel of works or some sort of secret Gnostic knowledge that you have to have? It's not really that. I think it's much more that I feel very impressed with the sense. When I say impressed, I don't mean I'm impressed, that's amazing. I mean, it pushes into me, which is that the gospel is more than a simple message about, let's go find the right way of saying it. We use the word salvation. We've trivialized the word salvation. It's just kind of like, oh, I was a sinner, but now I'm saved. Salvation, it's a real transformative word as you unpack it through the New Testament, that Paul expects someone's salvation to transform them. So we don't all die, but we're all changed. In other words, there may be some who, because Jesus comes again, don't see death, but none of us, if we've got hold of the gospel, won't be transformed by it. We will all be changed by it. And I think that kind of message has got lost sometimes in Protestant circles, because we've been saved by faith, full stop, and so it just stops there. It doesn't matter what else happens. But actually, life is fundamentally transformed when there's something about the gospel that we see. And it may not be what's obvious. It may not be the sort of simplistic message which, we can kind of articulate. And I don't want to trivialize the message. I just want to say it's easy to articulate that, he's paid the price, my sins are forgiven, all of those things. But actually, what does that mean? Well, actually, there's real value in this. And because it takes my life in all of its circumstances, all of the things that come against it, all of the gifts I've got, and I have the ability, as I get hold of this, to see and release something beautiful and valuable in that. So it may feel to you like I'm making more of a point than I should, but I think part of the problem is that we're so familiar with the words of Jesus that we lose their power and they lose their impact and lose their meaning. But there's something here in which, depending on who we are, what our gifts are, the way we see things, but for all of us, as we really anticipate, we really understand what the gospel means, which is God has taken the initiative with us. And that's the key word. It's the initiative. God always initiates, we respond, you see. So it's not that we achieve it because of our response, because actually we couldn't achieve anything if he'd not initiated. He takes the initiative. But actually we suddenly realize in the initiative he's taken, there is an opportunity to do something that leaves a beautiful mark in history. I can think of it like that. Maybe it's a nice way of putting it. Is that if I can get hold of it, I can see something that in my skills and gifts, greater value will be realized by the impact that the gospel has in me. So then we're moving on to the third parable of the kingdom. It's like a dragnet. So this is something, of course, that a lot of Jesus' disciples will understand, because at least 4 of them are fishermen. So it's cast in the sea and gathers up all kinds of fish. So all kinds of good and some rubbishy fish, some that are too small, some that would not be good to eat, probably some old tin cans and boots as well. Because actually the word fish isn't actually there. It gathers up some of everything. It's perhaps one way of putting it, but it's kinds of everything, and so the word fish is implied, but it's not actually there. So it gathers up all this stuff. And so when it's all filled, they draw it up on the beach. They sat down, they sorted the quality into the containers, but the bad they threw away. The thing that has real value. And again, this is something that Jesus' disciples and up near Galilee. Because remember, we saw how at the end of chapter 12, Jesus is down in the south, but as we've gone through, we seem to have moved up into Galilee now. And just before we got into the parables of the kingdom, we'd had Jesus's, in fact, right at the beginning of the parables of the kingdom, we'd had Jesus's brothers and sisters coming to find him, because he's now up in Galilee. They're going to come back in towards the end of this passage. So they've drawn it up onto the beach. They sort it out. They sort it into the quality, and they throw away the bad. And it will be like that at the end of the age. So there's something about the kingdom. So what is it then that is about the kingdom that is in that parable? Well, actually, the parable is that actually the process that God is involved with us in captures all sorts of stuff. And that's God's intention. It's called the kingdom. It's the king's will. It's the king's will to encompass both good and bad, but he is encompassing it. Nothing is outside of the influence of the gospel, but not everything is going to be transformed by the gospel or saved by the gospel, however you want to think of it. It's not dissimilar to those ideas in the Old Testament where the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. It's not necessarily that they're all covered by the glory of the Lord, but actually it's encompassed them all. The net has kind of reached out and it's within reach of everybody, and everybody is captured in it. And that's not a negative thing. If you look at history, history is brutal and violent. The human condition is full of plagues and starvation and wars and famines and all sorts of terrible things. But where God has transformed the hearts of communities, you often find everybody benefits, both the good and the bad. They're all lifted up, and there's something positive that all of them experience. But actually, there's something where Jesus is saying, but that doesn't mean to say that all of it is what God's going to keep hold of. Actually, there's something in his heart which allows it to capture everything, allows it to impact everything, allows it to salt and light everything, even though not everything at the end of the day is going to be saved. Now, that can be a very countercultural message, because we're very influenced now by, love means everything goes the right way. But unfortunately, that I always find those things, I kind of understand the logic of them, but they are the spirit of the age, which almost doesn't see anything, that doesn't understand evil. You, at a human level, knowledge of good requires an understanding of evil. And because we're not perfect, we're just good, and good is kind of, it's not absolute. It's just moving in the right direction. If good's moving that way, then bad is moving that way. We can't avoid that. There is something that is moving away from God. If 2 plus 2, the truth is it's always going to equal 4, but 2 plus 2 equaling 4.3 is perhaps more accurate than 2 plus 2 equals 15 million. That they're both wrong. But actually, there is a kind of one is moving towards the right direction. There's something being drawn towards the good. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember why I was going off on that little tangent. It was this issue of we are to be salt and light, as we saw in the Sermon on the Mount. There's something that we do that is good for society, that it captures everybody, not everybody who's necessarily deserving of it, if any of us are deserving of it, which none of us are, but but that's not the point. God is kind of capturing it all in the processes, the things he's drawing us into. Everybody benefits when hearts are being transformed by the gospel, but there will come a point, and that's the real key thing. We're told in Romans 10 that it's not our job to judge who goes up, who goes down, because that trivializes the work of Jesus. But actually, so it's not our job to kind of assign, but to understand that there is a time coming where what's bad gets shoved off and what's good gets kept, and that is part of our faith, and we can be thrilled by that and excited by that, and it inspires us to want to be transformed. And he'll throw them into the fiery furnace of fire, and they'll be actually it should just be. I've got fire in there twice. It should only be there once. I think I was juggling with which way round to do it. He'll throw them into the fiery furnace, or he'll throw them into the furnace of fire. But I've done it twice. It's unnecessary. Now you see, because of the way the way in which often our faith has come down to us, we over the years it's become more and more, it means one thing not another, one thing and another. So we often read these parables as being about something beyond what they actually are. The illustration he's given is just actually a very common everyday thing, which is you're still seeking out what's got value to it, what can be used and what hasn't you throw into the rubbish fires. You throw it into somewhere to burn up. You don't want to clutter the place up with stuff that you can't use and is unhelpful. But we often give it a hint of kind of eternal destiny, which actually takes the word of Jesus beyond their actual given context. I don't want to unduly kind of cause controversy in saying those sort of things, but I was just illustrating it this morning when I was talking through. If you think about things like when Jesus talks about the wise and foolish virgins. And the foolish virgins, you see, in a Middle Eastern wedding, normally held within a courtyard that's surrounded by buildings around the four sides, but with gaps in between. So it's kind of semi-enclosed. And if you're there, if you're a guest of honor, you're in there right in the middle of the courtyard, and it's all light and bright. If you get there late, then you're in outer darkness, you see. So Jesus tells a story, and there's the wise and foolish virgins. They've all had an opportunity to be right in the middle of the action with the dancing and the light, but some of them aren't ready. So when they get there, they're left in outer darkness. Now, because we've kind of constructed things after the event of Jesus, we look back and we think that he's talking about going to hell. He's not. He's just talking about being in outer darkness. And gnashing of teeth just means you're really irritated to be there. You know you could have been something better, but you missed the opportunity, and you're left in the outside edges where there aren't the lights, and everybody's having a good time in the middle where the lights are burning away. But lights cost money. They're not spread all over the countryside. If you're outside of the main courtyard, you're kind of looking in from the outside thinking, I could have been something more. So you get what I'm saying. If you really want to, you can make it all about eternal judgment, but that is taking it beyond the parable. So there's a separation going on. I guess that gives it a certain eschatological element to it, doesn't it? But you see, I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying don't jump. Don't make it say more than it actually says. He's using an illustration which they understand. You keep the good, you throw away the rubbish, and the rubbish gets burnt. So there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then he asked them, have you understood all of these things? Yes, they answered. And there's a little key kind of moment there. Have you understood them? So what have they had to understand? Well, there's something hidden, and actually it's going to cost them everything. That was right where we started. Actually, in what they put out as they get involved in pursuing this, they're going to encapture all sorts of stuff, and it's going to look messy and not that great. And you will regularly hear, I'm sure folks here will have encountered it, you probably felt it yourself, the frustrations that many believers will have with the fact that the church is not like Jesus. You know, that's the reality. It's full of rubbish too. It's got all of those things in it. It captures all of it, and you never know. We're not going to be the ones to make those judgments. We're going to wait till the end times. We're going to wait till it all's wound up, and we'll let it be a divine decision as to, okay, I understand the value that's in this, and where this hasn't got value. From where I stand right now, this is not that. This looks a bit ugly. It's not that great. I think there's no value in it at all. We should get rid of it. But let's wait. A bit like the parable of the wheat and tares, which we had last time. You can't always tell till something's full grown, full developed. So the question, do you understand this? And the response of yes is because these disciples are going to be the stewards of this message. It's going to cost them everything, and it's not going to be tidy and pretty. And because they're not living at the end of the age, they're living in the midst where all sorts of stuff is getting dragged along together, if I can put it those ways. And he said to them, because of this, every scribe who's been discipled into the kingdom of the heavens, got it right that time, is like a man, a master of a household, who draws out of his treasure new and old. And I love that little image. And I have to say, without it being, I found as I've got older and I've taught for more and more, my favourite environment for kind of teaching things is in a place where actually you don't know what the subject's going to be. It's just kind of ranging questions. And what I've often found is you find that you've got old treasures, things that you've thought through yourself, things that you were taught when you were younger, and you can draw them out and they're valuable. But equally, very often in those contexts, out of the old, sometimes you get new insights too. There's a question I've never thought of before that I'm being asked for in that kind of teaching environment. And actually suddenly, okay, I've got, if you like, the foundations that allow me to see something brand new in the moment. At one level, it can seem like new, and you think, well, that comes from nowhere, but it doesn't. It comes out of the life that's done like that. And here we've got every scribe who has been discipled. It kind of comes out of the process and the experience we have with the Lord in allowing ourselves to be shaped. We get to a point where it's not just the old things that helped shape us that we're able to draw from in a helpful way, but the process of doing it has also taught us how to appreciate and get new things as they're required. So just on a very personal level, I always find from a kind of a teaching point of view, sometimes you think, where did that come from? But that was really helpful in the moment. I had a pastoral experience just a few weeks ago, which I would say exactly like that. A really complex situation with legal and moral implications all over the place. And I suddenly found myself feeling really confident to say something a bit strange. And actually the guy who was a maturish Christian but was seeing no way through the situation said, that's so helpful. That really helps me now. I can do this and I won't feel so guilty. Now, I'm not going to spill the beans on exactly what it was, but at the time I thought, you know what, I'm sure that the Lord was in that. But it required a kind of pulling together of some of those old things, but in a brand new way. But some of that doesn't just happen by accident. It comes out of having done it over the years and having kind of developed that approach. So when eventually Jesus had finished these parables, he withdrew from there. So we get that kind of a standard form you get at the end of the in Matthew's Gospel, at the end of a teaching session. It finishes with a statement about Jesus had finished these words, or Jesus finished these parables, that finished these sayings, that kind of phrase, just to kind of bring it to conclusion. So there is a sense in which we're drawing to a conclusion in verse 53, but there are a few more verses before we get to the end of the chapter. And I thought we'd include those because they kind of capture the context that we went back to the start of the chapter. There were Jesus's brothers and sisters were knocking, trying to get to him, and he kind of said, "Who are my disciples?" Then there are men, there are women there, as well as and he's kind of brought that sense in of, if you're taking these things seriously, you become like blood to me, you become my family. And we now start to move back to focus on the family. So Jesus finished these parables, he withdrew from there, and going into his hometown, he was teaching them in their synagogue. So they were astonished and said, where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? Now, I'm assuming at this point that this is not the earlier experience where he's already gone in once and they tried to push him off the cliff, which was kind of before he starts to itinerate with his disciples, because he's now traveling with his disciples. So it looks like he's going back again, but to a place where we know there has been some tension. So he arrives in this hometown, he goes in, he's back in that same synagogue where he upset everybody because he talked about the faithfulness of the Gentiles and what God was going to do with them, and they didn't like that. But they're astonished, and now, of course, there is a much better known, wider experience of the miracles that Jesus has performed. So they ask the question, where did he get these from and these miraculous powers? Isn't this the builder's son? Isn't his mother called Mary? Most of you will know I almost always translate tekton as builder. Because it's a much more appropriate word. A tekton is someone, as in architect, is someone who works in construction. Is an artisan in construction, so he could work with wood, but it's wood. It's not wood to kind of make kind of nice little models or whatever. It's actually in the construction of houses and so on. And you're going to see this has an interesting little indication in the last little bit. So isn't his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and aren't all of his sisters with us as well? So we have a reasonable sized family. Looks like there's 5 boys, and probably let's imagine that there's more than 2 sisters, so perhaps 3 sisters, so 8 kids. That's not unusual. What's unusual is that they've all presumably survived into adulthood, which is a good kind of statement of the provision of God for the family. Is lots of families would have quite a large number of children, but quite a few of them wouldn't survive into young adulthood. But it looks like they're all around because they're referred to. So where then did this man get all of these things? So just asking those questions. But they took offence to him. So second time, same place, because it as is often the way, he's a bit more famous than he was when they tried to push him off the cliffside. But they're still offended by him, because as people always do, we remember people as they were, not who they become. And it's not that Jesus was somehow bad before and now he's good, but he was immature before and now he's a man. So he has to be treated as an equal, but he's an equal who's excelled himself, which always causes an offence to those who had the same opportunities, as they might see it. So Jesus said to them, a prophet's not without honour except in his own country and in his own house. But he didn't do many miracles there because of their unbelief, which is the final verse. I just wanted to finish with that, and his own house, because it's one of those remarkable, nice little kind of... I'm always astounded just how fast archaeological discoveries are illustrating the Gospels at the moment. So it's only about 2 years ago now they actually discovered Jesus' house, which I think, if you believe in Jesus at all, it's a pretty straightforward yes, this is Jesus' house type thing. Here is an actual kind of it's part of the excavation. This is Jesus' family home in Nazareth. It's the place where he was raised as a child. So the background story, I've put a little link to a BBC article about it that was published in 2020 when the report was produced on it by a secular academic who's not a Christian. Back in the Byzantine Christians used to know where this house was, but it was, as we got more modern and more sophisticated, everybody assumed that it was just a fable. It was just like part of the marketing thing. That everybody has a kind of a relic of somebody, and everybody knows where Jesus' house was, and so it was dismissed. It was only because of research being done by a professor at Reading University. I pointed behind me because Reading's in that direction from where I'm sitting. Just go up the motorway that way one, and you get to Reading University. Who's kind of reasonably well known because he was the archaeologist who discovered the fishing boat in Magdala. If you remember a few years back, you saw it on the news. This is a fishing boat like Peter would have used, and so on. And they were tracing some of the pilgrim routes, early Christian pilgrim routes. So they were not looking at the early first century period, and they came across there being two nunneries in Nazareth. One which seemed to have had written texts that go back to the 7th century or so, that were kind of claiming this is just trying to remember what there was. Oh yeah, one was supposedly the site of the synagogue, which we just heard Jesus teaching in, and the other was supposedly the site of Jesus' home. So as they were doing archaeology around there and they dug down, they actually found a 1st century Jewish home underneath the monastery. And here's the remarkable thing. I've just thrown a quote from it. So this is from Professor Ken Dark. He said, whoever built the house, so that is the house that's underneath the monastery, that has since the 7th century claimed to be the house where Jesus was nurtured and grew up. And then when I say it has claimed that since the 7th century, we have documents from them. We don't know how much earlier it was. But whoever built the house had excellent knowledge of the stoneworking, the sort of thing expected of someone who'd have been called a tekton, i.e. a builder, in the ancient world for craftsmen. The ancient word for craftsman that was used to refer to Joseph in the Bible. So Professor Ken Dark is 99. I think he puts it at 90-something% sure this is the house that Jesus grew up in. And the reason is because we have a very, very long written history, although we've dismissed it as being trivial. When we dug down, we found a house that was built in the 1st century. But it's been built by someone who gets all of his right angles incredibly correct. So everything is precise and square, just like the house would be built by someone. Unlike normally when they excavate a house, it's been kind of put together with enthusiasm, but not so much skill. This one has been put together by a working person, but someone who's very skilled in getting their angles right and so on. So it's just a nice of those little kind of touches, because the archaeological kind of evidence for the narratives of not just of the Gospels, but of the Bible as a whole, is remarkably strong. A big issue is made of the things where there are gaps, but having gaps is not the same as proof that they didn't happen. And when you look at other stories from the ancient world, we don't have the evidence that we have for the stories of the Gospel. And here you have a very kind of concrete, real location that actually fits the sort of the story and the narrative and has been recognised as such for all of those years. So I just like to throw those bits in because I always find them I think if you add those to some of the other things I've touched on before in the last few years, like the discovery of the Mount Ebal curse tablet, which is now throwing all of the theories where people have said, well, there weren't Hebrews there were no Israelites in the Promised Land at the time of the Exodus, or the time the Bible puts it. But now suddenly here we've got people using the name Yahweh. You put it together with things like the discovery of Sodom, which really was destroyed by fire that fell from heaven, because we can tell from the way that the sand's been turned into glass, so on. These kind of things are happening quite regularly. So there is a kind of a growing confirmation of the broad narrative. Obviously, it doesn't fill in the detail, but you get that broad narrative. So I just thought it was worth kind of throwing that at the end, seeing as hometown, home synagogue, and his own home and his family are all part of the mix. And just to say, we can actually kind of locate that in a very specific location within a few feet, thinking Jesus and his brothers and sisters would have actually sat down in this space to eat meals together and so on. So anyway, those are my thoughts today. I always take more than half an hour, so I do apologise. Does anyone want to ask anything or comment on anything before we come to take our break for a week or two, for a few weeks? Nice to see you, by the way, Barbara. You turned up a bit late. I didn't see you at the beginning.
You too. Yeah, sorry, I was doing some ministry and couldn't. It was really important. It was restoring the foundations. But yes, I did wonder if you'd managed to talk to your sister
I haven't talked to her,
no.
No.
Was your sister, wasn't it? Yeah.
Who?
You were going to see if she might be interested in doing some Greek.
Oh yes, I haven't actually. No, I'll see her at Revive next week. So
sure,
I'll bring it up then. Yeah.
Lovely. No. But yeah, I missed last week's as well. As another aspect of this. But anyway, I shall catch up on the replay.
Brilliant. Good. Anyone else want to say anything or ask anything?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. That was really good, and I was touched by it. Well, when you said about having an eye to see, that
we
was
lost you there, Colin.
Oh,
you suddenly went silent, and then you came back again.
Oh, so maybe it's the connection. Yeah, having an eye to see, that was a very interesting point. That it's there, but not everybody can see it, and that alludes to when Paul talks about having your. He prays that our spiritual eyes
be open,
are open further and further, as it were.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a human skill, but there's something in the spiritual skill that we develop to be able to see the possibilities.
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I've got something, Kristen. Right at the beginning, you said that God places value in people, and the things that we struggle with develop character.
Yeah.
And I've always, when people say hardship develops character, it's a bit of a cliche, and I've never really thought about it much. The way you describe it there is that those things that we become fascinated with, the things that we look deeper into, are those things that actually make us more interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly the people I know who are the most interesting to talk to are generally those who have interesting insights into things, and they've only really interested in those things because they're looking for a solution for something.
Exactly. That is exactly. So I think I understand what you say when you say it can be a bit trivial. Hardship produces character, but the more I find the things that are most valuable to me, the more I realize I've actually had to struggle over them. So, so there is a kind of a sense in which it can sound a bit harsh. It's a bit like the Viktor Frankl thing, which is, that meaning kind of emerges from suffering. It's often the way we've engaged with suffering that we discover meaning. It's not that the suffering gives us meaning, but it's actually it's been the thing that's thrown that meaning into relief, if that makes sense. But in a similar way, I think that exactly the way you just put it there, Mark, was exactly right, which is if you've got a question, if you accept something, if you just accept it as trivial, you never discover the exciting thing that comes when you say, I don't get that. That doesn't make sense. I need to understand that. I'm determined to. It's really nagging at me. I know it's not quite the same thing, but I always remember there's a quote. I'm just trying to think which philosopher it was from. Or as a mathematician who said, he said, I know that God. He said, I know that God exists because of the correlation between mathematics and physics. And he said, and I know that the devil exists because I can't understand why that's the case. And I always thought there was something kind of nice in that there is a kind of a sense in which to make sense of the world, you have to accept that maths kind of somehow reflects the real world, even though it's a purely mental activity. And so he was saying that kind of tells me that somehow there's a God behind the universe. But because of the fact I can't explain why, that's so frustrating. So I know it's not quite the same, but actually to recognise that it's most people don't ever ask the question. It's just what it does, doesn't it? You know, S equals VT. If I'm going this fast, I'll get there in this length of time. But actually, that's quite a mystery, and it's that people who get bothered by it. It's like the devil for them. Why does that work? Why does it work? In the end, I have to accept it does, and then I think to myself, well, it must be because of God. So even that devilish kind of engagement has now led me to the Creator. That's, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Nope.
Well, it was interesting to see the Jesus's house stuff. That was yeah.
So I'll probably put the link when I post the good version of the video up. I'll put the link in the description so you can just click on it. But it was on if you can pause the thing at that point, you can type in the link to the BBC article. I think I saw it I get a kind of an email once a month from Biblical Archaeology, so I think I saw it in there originally. But I just, before I came on, I thought, let's go and see if I can find a picture of it. And I thought, BBC's done one. So, you know, whether the BBC is a kind of doyen of truth, I'm not sure, but but it has a certain level of credibility to it.
I think it used to be.
Yeah, it used to be. That's right. It used to be.
Kristen, I'm interested in how the way Jesus communicated the principles of the kingdom in such a sort of hidden way impacts our sharing of the kingdom today of evangelism. And if you've got thoughts about that.
So I think that there's something about the way we're made that doesn't like to be told, even when something's true. And when I do stuff, you know, I learned a lot by trying to teach to non-believers, because, you know, where I did stuff in my old university, and I've noticed that actually you have to engage people to be interested. So even a couple of weeks ago, myself and Jude got invited to a barbecue, so we're the only kind of Christians there, as far as I know. And I had a really fascinating, really lovely conversation with a guy. Got on very well with him. But I was deliberately circumspect in trying to. I was honest. I said, you know, asking what do. I do various things. One of which is I'm leading a church 2 days a week. One of which is this. One of which is that. And as he started asking he asked loads and loads of questions. And I find myself at the end of the evening, I apologise that I'd ended up speaking so much to him, at which we had talked about the Bible. We had talked about how to interpret the Bible, but he had asked all of the questions. So when I apologised, he said, no, I've been asking you. I thought, actually, there's something better that way round than kind of try. If you'd gone in, and if you go in and you're all, I want to tell you about this, and what's your almost instant, it would be kind of cut off. But actually, if someone is looking for truth, then they will be interested in what you've got, as long as you're not trying to throw everything, trying to make a proof too quickly, if I can put it that way. So I just think there's something of that which is in a simplistic way. I think I was touching on this the other week. I can't remember if it was this group or not, but I used to not. There's a certain level I don't like the appeal to mystery as a kind of. I think that's sometimes a cop out. It's just it's just a mystery. We'll leave it. But actually, if you this is a mystery, I want to engage with it. Then actually it becomes something very profound. But actually, you realise that faith is navigating towards truth through mystery. But that mystery actually has a certain allure to it. If rather than being too certain, because I've got it all tied up. The universe was created at 2:20 p.m. on the 1st of 3068 BC or whatever, and this happened on this date. Now, as someone who loves the history side, I like to try and put all those things into place. But when we come across with, I've got my little package all nicely tied up, it does lose interest for people. And more often than not, they get obsessed on the bit that you got wrong, rather than understanding actually how the flow of stuff is driving towards a sense of a creator with purpose in the universe. And actually, that's really what you want them to discover. So.
That just makes me think about how God speaks to us in dreams, and it is quite hidden, isn't it? You know, and I think there's something about that makes us really sort of dig in to God and ask those questions rather than having it right. This is what you do. This,
Exactly. Yeah. No.
And we just lose interest in that. Yeah.
No.
Interesting.
Good. Well, we're at 1:50, so I know in theory I do this so that people can take their lunch breaks. We're getting near the end of what would be a lunch break. I think most people have got a bit of flexibility for when they take their breaks, so don't have to be quite as precise. But did anyone want to ask anything or comment anything else before we go? No, so it'll probably be about 3 or 4 weeks, but I'll send an email out when we get going again. So we probably start at the beginning of September, I think, with the so we'll take a break over August, get going again in September. But it was nice to have folks here today. So I think we were 9 in total at one point, down to 8 now. Right. Well, so I will say my goodbyes and look forward to seeing you in September. Unless I see you all over. See you at
yes,
Revive.
we'll see you next week. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Have a good summer, people. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Kristen.